Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right into something that is incredibly fascinating and frankly, super urgent today. A real-time snapshot of California in 2026. Right now, Californians are caught in this crazy intersection of pressures. We're talking massive, statewide economic squeezes, all the way down to deeply personal physical and digital threats. But it's not all doom and gloom. We're also going to look at the actual tangible protections being debated by state leaders right now to combat these issues. We'll unpack the whole shebang together, looking at the hard data and the direct words of people on the ground to really understand what's at stake.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, the squeeze of affordability. 2, the fight for basic needs. 3, protecting vulnerable Californians. 4, securing your digital identity. And finally, number 5, the insurance commissioner race.
Starting right off with Section 1, the squeeze of affordability. Take a look at this stat from the Green Lining Institute. 65%. That is the staggering number of Black renters in California who are currently rent-burdened. And you know, this isn't just happening in a vacuum, right? It's the result of historical, systemic barriers just violently colliding with today's intense economic pressures. And it really doesn't stop at housing. Black families are paying 43% more for energy than white households, and roughly 1 in 3 Black adults recently reported dealing with household food insecurity. This affordability squeeze, it isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's a full-blown systemic crisis forcing people to make some truly impossible choices every single day.
And what's interesting is that there's actual bipartisan agreement on just how severe this crisis has become. On one hand, Assemblymember Rhodesia Ransom points out a huge shift in behavior. She notes that people aren't choosing between wants and needs anymore. They're literally having to prioritize among their absolute basic needs, with gas and food fighting for the top spot. Then, across the aisle, Assembly Minority Leader Heath Flora is sounding the exact same alarm about those spiking gas prices, which, by the way, have hit $7 or $8 a gallon in some places. He points out that families are pushed to the brink and absolutely should not have to choose between eating and driving. The consensus here is crystal clear. State leaders across the board recognize this cost of living squeeze as a critical emergency.
So what's being done? Well, Governor Gavin Newsom recently announced a $1.4 billion injection in state climate credits to try and give Californians some relief on their electricity and gas bills. Sounds pretty massive, right? But here's where it gets complicated. This state-level relief is colliding head-on with some enormous federal changes. At the exact same time California is injecting that $1.4 billion, the Trump administration's H.R. 1 is projected to slash federal SNAP spending by roughly $187 billion through 2034. That's billion with a B. It's a really stark contrast in policy, and ultimately it puts a ton of pressure right back on the state budget to somehow backfill those critical needs for families.
Which brings us right into Section 2, the fight for basic needs.
Wow, okay, just look at this drop. We are currently looking at a proposed 90% slash to California's cow food program. Funding would plummet from $80 million down to just $8 million. This program is absolutely essential because it allows food banks to buy California-grown produce at a discount. Right now, food banks in the state are serving around 6 million people every single month. If this cut goes through, local pantries, especially the ones on college campuses that rely so heavily on this pipeline, are warning that their shelves will practically be bare. The stability of food assistance is on the verge of plummeting.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look past the spreadsheets and see the actual human impact. Take Kalafani Mackey, for example. He's a student at Bakersfield College, and he shared this incredibly sobering story. At his campus, around 7,000 students line up at the Renegade Pantry every month. Kalafani literally chose to skip his classes just for a chance to get a free bag of groceries. And the kicker? By the time he finally got to the door, it was closed because the line was just too long. Research shows over 70% of California college students face food insecurity, which leads straight to lower GPAs and higher dropout rates. Like Kalafani told legislators, if you actually value a student's trajectory, you cannot cut it short over something as essential as food.
Moving on to Section 3, Protecting Vulnerable Californians.
This next issue is literally a matter of life and death. Assembly Bill 2499, which is also known as the Adrian Act, was prompted by a profound tragedy. Adrienne Bouwer, a 47-year-old mother, passed away from complications related to extreme heat exhaustion while inside a state women's prison. As climate change ramps up, indoor temperatures in these aging facilities are regularly blasting past 90 degrees. So this bill demands some basic humane conditions. It requires the state to set up an extreme heat pilot program by 2027 and to create long-term plans for installing HVAC systems and shade structures. It's a very harsh reminder that sometimes infrastructure is exactly what keeps people alive.
And speaking of lifelines, $100 million. That is the exact funding gap currently left by declining federal VOCA funds. Right now, advocates of the state capitol are fighting tooth and nail to get this $100 million included in the state budget. Why is this so critical? Because without it, organizations that provide emergency shelter, counseling, and direct support for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse are going to face devastating service cuts.
Jazz Ledbetter, who is a survivor of human trafficking and now this incredibly fierce advocate, put it so perfectly. She said the difference between survival and unfortunately common, sad stories is whether or not someone is there when it matters the most. Without the right funding for these shelters, victims are literally forced to stay in highly dangerous situations. Trauma-informed care is not just a line item in a budget, right? It is an absolute, non-negotiable lifeline.
All right, let's pivot and bring this down to a highly personal level. Section 4, Securing Your Digital Identity.
So the threat landscape has evolved incredibly fast. With AI now able to perfectly replicate human voices and emotionally manipulate people into handing over their data, relying on just one security measure? Yeah, that's definitely not enough anymore. You need a layered defense strategy. Experts say there are 3 non-negotiable steps you've got to take today. First, turn on multi-factor authentication. It just creates that crucial extra roadblock for hackers. Second, get a password manager. It generates and secures complex passwords for you. Honestly, trying to keep them all in your head or just using your pet's name with a number 1 at the end, it's just not going to cut it. And third, don't just check your credit score. Actually review your credit reports closely to spot any weird, unauthorized accounts early on. Actually, let me ask you something. Think about this for a second. If you suddenly get that dreaded notification on your phone that your data was breached, what is your immediate emergency response plan? Do you know the very first step you have to take?
Here it is. The absolute first thing you must do is contact one of the 3 credit bureaus and place a fraud alert on your name. It sounds so simple, right? Yet, in a panic, most people completely forget to do it. This immediate freeze stops criminals in their tracks, preventing them from opening new accounts and wrecking your credit score, all while you take the time to call your banks and lock down your existing accounts. Memorize this step. It is literally your emergency brake in a digital crisis.
Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 5, the Insurance Commissioner race. Now, you might be wondering how all these massive issues tie together. Well, a lot of it comes down to regulatory oversight. As you likely know, the Insurance Commissioner is the state watchdog overseeing the 3rd largest insurance market in the entire world. Think about it. You literally cannot legally drive your car or buy a house without dealing with the industry this one official regulates. So when we talk about the affordability squeeze or people being unable to rebuild after a wildfire, the policies enforced by this specific office are right at the heart of the conversation.
With the June primary creeping up, candidates are definitely making their cases. Stephen Bradford, a veteran public servant who's running for the role, points out a pretty glaring flaw in the current system. Right now, it takes over 300 days to approve rate changes in California. That's a massive bureaucratic delay that ends up pushing consumers onto these inadequate state-backed fare plans. He's campaigning on modernizing that system, bringing in transparency, and tackling historical inequities in coverage. But more broadly, he reminds voters that hitting the ballot box is the single most powerful tool you have to demand real accountability from these vital state offices.
So, what does this all mean for us? Which brings us to the big question to end our explainer today. Will you use your power to protect your future? We've covered a lot of ground today, from the massive affordability crisis squeezing families to the absolute necessity of physical safety in our state facilities, all the way down to locking down your own digital footprint. The challenges heading into 2026 are definitely complex, but as we've seen through the hard data and the powerful voices of advocates, there are very clear paths to protection. Ultimately, it's up to us to stay informed and actually take action. Thank you so much for joining me today on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay secure, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.